So, yeah, I am maybe a little bit, in my experience, the same as Eric. On the other hand, the last research that I did myself was in 1997, and since then I've been a programmer in industry and slowly grown into being a manager of processes and organizations. So it's a bit strange how I rolled into data management and data management planning from about 2012, where I got interactions with a funder in the Netherlands who wanted to organize data management and data management planning for all their calls. And they had assembled a number of experts. And yeah, I just started collecting all kinds of information on decisions that people need to make during a project that have implications for data management. So that's about me. So now, actually, in the Netherlands, I am the technical coordinator of Elixir Netherlands. Elixir is the life science data S3. I think what we've heard so far about data management planning is, and what brings us here sometimes, is we have to. Our funders, our institutes, they are telling us, you have to do data management planning. You have to make a data management plan. And I think Eric also, in his talk, gave a little bit of an impression on why it's good for science, actually, that you can actually use this data again and again, and that it's useful to actually have the data available for reproducibility and for reusability. And in my talk here, I will try to make the case that it's actually good for your own project to have data management and data management planning. So I'll first show you an image of an old lab, a biologist in an old lab. And I'll quickly go to the next slide, which shows you biologists in a new lab. And there's a huge difference. And the huge difference here is that the microscope is similar, but computers and digital data are pervasive. They are how we process all the information now, no longer with pen and paper. Most of our data are coming digitally. All the interpretation is done by algorithms. The volumes of the data that we're using are growing immensely. And also the variety of data, the types, grow immensely. So in many projects, we are no longer doing only genetics. We're having projects that are doing genomics, proteomics, and metabolomics, and integrating all that variety of data. And that makes things complicated. So we have a lot of data, and we want to be able to reuse it for a longer period. And that's I think, the idea that we've heard. We want to do data management. And we want to keep this for eternity. And I think Eric gave the impression of what is data management, what is data stewardship, and I did draw it here again. So a lot of people say data management is what you do during your project. And then it finishes when your project finishes. But that would be a waste of the data. And data stewardship is for eternity. But the problem then is that a lot of people see that data stewardship actually starts at the end of the project. And I disagree, actually. And I will use data management and data stewardship interchangeably because I think they're interdependent. You're not going to do data management during your project to give up on your data afterwards. And neither can you actually do data stewardship after your project if you haven't done data management during the project well. And also from the questions, now we had the question, what is data? And for me, anything that is digital information is data. And I know that even surrounding me, there are people that are saying, well, you're looking at it from a too tight perspective, because data management also applies to the actual biological samples that we are taking, which of course are associated with digital data as well. And other people are including actually the paper that things are written on. I'll restrict myself to digital data. So how much digital data do we have? In the past, we used to have projects in which, say, 1% of what we were doing was handling digital data. And that doesn't require very much planning, because if something goes wrong, you just do it again, and maybe you overdraw your budget by 1%. There's no big deal. So we can easily do it again. yeah, we of course plan an experiment that is very expensive, but if it's just a small thing like data and but important things we always plan. We plan the big experiments that are part of our projects. We plan the papers in many cases, so we know already what kind of paper we want to get out of the. This is a big thing, but a small thing we don't really need to do. But now we heard that the average over all science worldwide is supposed to be 5% handling of digital data. That's getting there. Now maybe it pays off to start planning. But what in fact I think is that this 25% that Eric also mentioned, that's much more likely to be what we in our life science projects actually are encountering. And then, if it's 25%, we can no longer afford to forget parts of this. Because if we overdraw the budget, right, by forgetting 20% of our data management, we overdraw the budget by 5%, maybe the project will fail altogether. Similarly, we cannot play until it works. We just have to do it right at once. We cannot redo it when we do it wrong. So what we actually need to start doing is treat our data like royalty. And I don't know whether anyone has been involved in organizing a party where royalty is there, royalty is present. If you invite royalty, you deal with protocol. And our protocol is called the data management plan, or a data stewardship plan. So we use the data stewardship plan to avoid surprise costs. I personally have seen data stewardship plans in which costs were underestimated by a factor of 100. So it's useful actually to ask somebody. We also use it to avoid surprise deadlines. I'll give some more examples this afternoon, but I've heard about entire data sets that were lost based on 6 days lack of funding. And in short, the whole data management we can actually use to get expert opinions where we need them. I think Eric made the good state that it is very difficult. We are not supposed to be able to do all of it ourselves. And then the next question is, when do we actually have to make a data management plan or data stewardship plan? And there, different funders have different approaches. And so there are some funders that are saying, well, if you apply for funding with us, then we want the data management plan to be part of your application. Yeah, that's okay, but it's of course very difficult to get all the aspects of your data management already planned out before you actually start your project. Some of the things become clear during the project. There are other funders saying, well, you know, you do something at the beginning, but then as part of the project in the first 6 months or in the first year, you actually make the data management plan. And this has an advantage, of course. It's part of the project now, so actually the making of the data management plan is also part of the funding, which makes sense if it's hard work. The only problem is, of course, that you are already supposed to know how much funding you will need for your data management before the project starts, because you applied for a certain amount of funding. So it's too late for you to find out that you underestimated the costs. And actually now, between these two models, there are advantages and disadvantages, and I disagree with both of them. Actually, what I think data management planning is much broader than that. We can learn from the army. So Dwight Eisenhower already said that you cannot make a plan and expect it to live. And there are other statesmen that have said similar things. So Helmut von Moltke said, no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. And a little bit going out of the army, the more general saying is, when your plan meets the real world wins. So no matter how careful you plan your work in your data stewardship plan, the reality will always be different. So the story is, you shouldn't force yourself to do during your whole project what you've planned out to do in the first 6 months, but you do want the data management plan to represent what you're actually doing. And for that reason, data management planning is something that you start before the project, and you continue all along the project. And at the end, when it really represents what you've done, then the data management plan actually functions as a part of the documentation of the data. It actually says how you obtained the data and how you treated it. Now, and if you have one of those huge projects, multi-year projects with many work packages, then one of those 500,000 EOSC data managers is actually a good thing to have in your project, and make him responsible for a data management work package. And such a person will know in your institute where to find all the experts. He won't be an expert on all the aspects of data management himself, but at least knows where to find it. So now I'm coming to what the primary goal of this data management plan should be. And we've had, okay, reproducibility and reusability, but how does that benefit yourself? Well, my reasoning is actually you have to aim in your data management plan to make the data reusable, but I write it in two different colors. Because if you make your data reusable, you thereby also make it usable. And you are the first user of your data in your project. So if you make it reusable, then you actually understand your own data tomorrow. And you also understand your own data in 3 months when the reviewer asks you some details about how you processed it. And otherwise, you just won't remember. I think many of us have the experience that you're sitting behind a computer trying to reproduce a result of yesterday and it just doesn't work and you don't understand it. A proper data management planning, you have for reproducibility, you really need to store so much how you've done it, and if you plan that well, you're also able to use that information yourself. So how do we make data reusable? Well, we've had the acronym. Reusability is the 4th step out of FAIR. So I don't think Eric didn't really say that it's a letter, but I think the 4 letters are a little bit independent, but actually I think that you can only step on the R if you've gone through F, A, and I before. So make your data findable, accessible, interoperable, and then reusable. So what is the interoperability? Yeah. The questions in the life sciences and in any science become more and more difficult. So if we want to combine information about 2 different diseases, then of course the people from those 2 disease communities can say, well, you know, I have some data that you can use. The problem is, here you have it, we can't use that kind of information if we didn't plan beforehand that it had to be interoperable with each other. Making these kind of things afterwards interoperable is actually quite hard. So, of course, there is already a lot of data, and making that interoperable is making us suffer right now if we want to reuse it. But we don't want to augment that problem with our own interoperable data later. So, we have to really use the standards that are there, know about those standards, and apply add sufficient metadata about the data to actually make this interoperability possible. So for me, a data management plan is really making the data fair from the beginning. And then the reusability is actually doing something for yourself, for the usability. Now, I've been at a conference of the Research Data Alliance, and there was a discussion about data management planning and how data management plans can not only be used by the researcher, but also by their institutes before even the data is available to do planning, by the funders to make statistics over projects. There are so many things that data management plans, if they could be computer readable, could be used for. And then somebody stood up and said, you know, the problem is I am a researcher and I don't want to write data management plans. I want to write papers. And that made me think. Of course, making a data management plan is a chore. Nobody wants to do that. But so is actually writing a paper. But we all know that we cannot do science without writing papers. And I think we all learn in the coming years that we cannot do science without doing a proper data management plan. So in the afternoon, I will give you some examples of the choices that you can make during data management. Choices for things that you encounter during your project, how you can actually make a good choice based on the FAIR principles. And yeah, I think for now we can just go to whatever you have as questions.